Yeah, the Opus model, I mean, Claude Code has been crazy. Are y'all using Cowork or what are y'all doing?
Yeah, I mean, we're using everything now. I mean, it's yeah, it's hands down. I need to go and play more with like Cowork and getting everything set up, but like, yeah, just the general like drafting anything in it. I think you and I were talking like Excel and PowerPoint are dead and 100%. Like, I think I was telling you like 20 minutes before our all hands, I was like, oh, I need two slides. And I literally just went in and was like, here's slide one. Here's what I need to convey. Here's slide two. Help me put this together. And maybe I'm lazy or whatever, but like the images and everything that it came out with, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And, but it like did it like, and it was like PowerPoint ready, exported it to Google naturally and, sent that to my ops and they put it in the deck.
Crazy. Did they ask you how you generate the graphics or anything? Or
No, I mean, my founder was like, he found like a spelling error or not even spelling error. It was like, cause I was dictating it. And so the way I said a name, it like spelled it. And he's like, oh, you spelled the name wrong. And I was like, oh, and I went in edit. I was like, oh, blame AI. And then he laughed, but yeah, just like, yeah, I, that would have taken me forever previously. Cause I'd have been like, oh, drag this, like what clip art am I going to use? Like formatting.
just scratch, clip art.
You
I
know,
did something kind of similar. So just following the kickoff, there was like, I have a mental framework of kind of how I wanted to do the executive engagement. And so I just pulled the titles from both companies and just said, all right, put together an executive engagement plan. And partially because I was on the plane and I just wanted to kick it off before I got on the plane because like I'm not going to open my laptop and I just want to be on my phone and all the things. And then I was doing the same thing, like, okay, let's, tighten up the co-sell aspect. And, so which is in my mind a little bit more complex because it's got to understand the core offerings of the company or my customer, Amazon Web Services, how they play together. And it just did a phenomenal job of kind of piecing that all together. And then it asked me, and I had never done a PowerPoint with Claude. And so, would you like me to create a PowerPoint deck? I was like, yes. And I was like, dude, it was legit, especially if you don't have all the corporate requirements of like logo and branding. And I think Canva or yeah, and Figma and Adobe are probably working on that or PowerPoint, so you can do it in your corporate style. The downside is you really can't edit it in PowerPoint. It's not the traditional, there's no layouts, right? And so you can't just be adding new slides. So it's kind of like a one trick pony in a way, but it's still really powerful. So
yeah, I even was like testing very similar, like putting together like a response to a customer who was like, oh, well, like we're talking to your competitor or whatever. And I was like, hey, Claude, here's my opportunity that I'm trying to close their website. Take their voice and what they're focused on and wrap that to a value add prompt that I can deliver. And it did. It was like, oh, because you're focused on XYZ. And I was like, I didn't even have to go look at the site. So maybe that's the laziness that it's going to inject in us. This we're not doing any research anymore and we're just trusting it.
yeah,
But I was like, I'm fine copying and pasting and sending this.
totally. And I think more and more, right? We can just, the quality is just so high. You can do that. So you want to jump into the media today? There's a lot that
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get through all of it, but there's some cool headlines. Going to kind of break down a lot of good articles and podcasts about kind of the new world of startups and SaaS. I mean, the multipliers have been compressed and the ever changing landscape. So I'll just kick it off with the GTM related. So Monaco, I think you sent this over to me, launches the AI native sales platform. Watched the demo on that. I thought that was pretty impressive. Kind of interesting combination of like automation, CRM, and like lead scoring, and then follow up. RSL, they launched their GTM operating system for Salesforce and HubSpot, which is always interesting because as if you have something sit on top of your platform, you run the risk of being disintermediated. essentially RSL could essentially become the GUI with your customers. And then it decreases the value of your backend, which actually Snowflake CEO talked a lot about that as the threat for these model providers. And they want to be the front door. So they've really got to take a co-opetition. They need to partner, but they need to own the end customer experience. So the RSL is interesting. This Zoom info, this repeating pattern of crushing their numbers, whether it's Salesforce or ServiceNow, but then having kind of, I wouldn't say weak, but, conservative estimates moving forward, just getting crushed. I think they just dropped like 35% in the last 30 days, they said after the results. So pretty insane. I don't know. I'm not hearing these names come up in any of my conversations. I'm just hearing it kind of in the Twitter sphere. ChatGPT is talking about it when I ask what trends, but I mean, what do you make all these recent announcements in February so far?
Yeah. I think going back to what we've talked about a few times is I think that it's a lot of noise and it's a lot of hype for these like smaller ones, right? Like the Monacos of the world. I think they're impressive, but yeah, I think there's still a ways to go. And I think the vibe coding to thing that the narrative of like vibe coding is going to remove the SaaS products. Yeah, I don't think that there's any actual fundamentals there yet, but I think the Snowflake commentary is interesting though, because I think that they're able to look around corners and recognize that. And that's, I think, where the danger hits is like, yeah, if you don't own it and you let it get too far ahead of itself, then it's harder to get the cat back in the bag, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about kind of I almost put the data platforms as more as platform as a service than SaaS truly. So, and I wonder if you can kind of see that Databricks is not getting older. They're a private company. So I'll just take that story back. But specifically in the SaaS, everyone's so bullish on this idea of these SaaS companies finding product market fit so quickly, scaling to 100 million. And as we've talked many, many, many times, you're going to hit a ceiling and then you have to jump into the enterprise. And so much of this data still sits in your HubSpots, your Salesforces, your ServiceNows, your Zendesks. And I even, saw some things interesting last week with my customer. The quote unquote legacy incumbents are still walled gardens. So Glean, perfect example, they had their big kind of fallout or fight with Salesforce last year. And they basically, so Glean's whole point of view or value prop is we're going to create a copy of everything that is essentially within your organization. And so, then we can run queries on it, right? And generative AI. And so we really have a good handle of what y'all are talking about. Salesforce said, no, you can't make a copy of anything in Slack. I think customers basically locked them out. And then customers are like, WTF, how are you telling me I literally can't have third-party access to my own data? And they said, oh, okay, well, you can have real-time query access, but you can't store it. And then they went ahead and launched like a whole new service around it with the Salesforce, like real-time query. And then Glean was a launch partner. So it's I looked at some research on ServiceNow and HubSpot, and there's varying degrees. I would say Salesforce.com is the most locked in, if you will, or locked out, however you want to look at. And then the others are a little bit more open, but I wonder with how fast you can build with AI in a lot of these, I think there's tremendous value in efficiency, right? Because in my mind, the core value of so many of these CRMs or new AI platforms for GTM are actually, we're not going to let anything fall through the cracks. We're going to do faster lead scoring, better data enrichment, faster profiling, automation workflows, automated reach out with like human in the feedback, human in the loop. But if you just continue down that process and every company, every customer has purchased your platform, you're either spamming everyone because there's just, multiple competitors in every industry. And then it's like, well, how are you going to differentiate and stand out? What's your true distribution moat differentiator? Or the other pendulum extreme would be I don't know, segregated the market so well that you are only finding like ICP matches with each customer. And so actually there's less noise in the system, which I just don't believe that. I think it's just going to be so easy and so cheap to create output that people are just going to say, well, why not? And in either scenario, I don't see the perfect fit happening. I think you're just going to have more AI slop and more noise in the system. And so I just wonder like how effective it's still going to come back to what is your core value prop, and then making sure that resonates with customers, and then all the machines are going to do is just ship it faster. So if you're making a widget that's broken, now you can make a broken widget 1,000 times faster. Does that really help you? I guess that's my soapbox moment.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, and just like real frontline like feedback. So the Glean one is interesting because about a year ago, I was advocating that we paid for the upgrade for our Salesforce to Slack integration. So I got the budget approval on that. And then Salesforce team was like, oh, and then you know, if you pay a little bit more, right? Like we have this AI add-on, and it basically was like, it'll be in Slack and Salesforce. And I pitched it, but the price delta was a little too much. And the team was like, oh, well, we're exploring other options. And like Glean was one of them. And I was like, well, but Glean is just like putting themselves on top of Salesforce. So I don't use Salesforce directly. And I was like, oh, well, we're still doing our product research. And then Salesforce issued that like, hey, cease and desist, like you can't access.
Yeah.
But long story short, I think it was a great play on Salesforce's behalf because they locked them out. On our side, that engagement and like searching for that sort of tool just sort of dithered. And then Salesforce came back and was like, hey, we're just giving you access to this. Gave us Salesforce AI and SFTC integration, turned it on, and the team loves it now. Like now everybody uses it, and you can search Salesforce from within Slack and ask questions about accounts. And so great play on Salesforce behalf by nuking a third party because, and it makes my life easier too, because now it's like the procurement's easier. It's all on one contract. But I think they were able to look around a corner there and be like, if we don't take care of this, like we're going to get disintermediated. And I think they made the right move advocating for Salesforce. Maybe Glean was great, but this makes my life easier.
I think Glean is still great, but I think it's a good example of how the incumbents are not just going to stand still, right? The cost to deliver software and features is coming down from everyone, and so the current lock-in. And I think I was listening to an A16Z podcast on this. It was really interesting where they look at what is the differentiation and defensibility of these different customers or companies, and so they want their customers as hostages, which I thought was interesting. So essentially, right, Salesforce's customers are hostage to them, have all their data, all their workflows, all their automations built around it. You probably say the same thing around most software companies that are really successful, Microsoft and the like, right? Bundling of contracts and your core backend up processes running SAP or Oracle, whatever it is, NetSuite. But it was interesting. They look at Greenfield versus Brownfield. So Greenfield being going in after a new customer, brownfield being converting, so this Monaco or RSL, flipping Salesforce customer to them versus maybe there's a market, a segment that isn't, they're unlocking like a new use case, which again, the GTM operating system would then sit on top of. So it's essentially a greenfield in terms of like use case or market, total addressable market. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Some other scary aspects, so they also look at, does the startup own the end-to-end workflow? So if features are not going to be a moat, you really have to essentially end the user experience and have them all live within your application. And then obviously we know data is another moat, and data is gravity. But what was interesting is with all these evolutions in productivity from generative AI and Claude Code, it used to be software is eating the world. They said software is about to eat labor, which is not good for it. So, when you can, instead of having an EA, or whatever, 40, 75, 100,000 a year, you could have an EA bot or bots for 20,000 a year. And it's like, you can kind of see where that could totally get traction. Or the flip side is the only way for these valuations to make sense is they're going to have to pull the cost savings from labor, which essentially companies can't just buy more shit. They've got to balance their budget. So they're going to pay people less by laying them off. And then they're going to give that money to software companies. And then that's how they would value, OpenAI and Claude would make their valuations work, which again is pretty terrifying given how fast these things are moving.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is interesting.
Yeah. One of the, so Brian, I think it's Haddigan, he's the former CEO of HubSpot. He said it's never been easier to build a company or start one, but it's also never been harder to scale. And it goes back to the distribution as your moat. With so many people starting companies and so many solutions, because it's so easy to build the solutions now, it just becomes that much harder to differentiate and really find like hit that tipping point of like network effects with your customer acquisition. So it's such a different market to think about, where right now you have the largest software companies are highly concentrated, to potentially go from that to a highly fragmented software or into like category of markets, because everyone's got a shingle out or a different software solution. I feel like the 90s or early 2000s, when there's like so many ERP solutions or like software companies focused on little niches, and then they eventually got consolidated and rolled up under different an IBM or an Oracle or Microsoft, and now we're kind of swinging back. Are we going to just have thousands of CRM solutions because it's that easy before we reconsolidate? I don't know, but it seems like that could be possible given how easy it is to build these things.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely possible. And I think goes back to, we talked about building like the niche app for the niche or nascent industry of like roofers or tree trimmers, whatever. If like, the tree trimming world or roofing, and what a good CRM would look like for them versus out of the box HubSpot or Salesforce.
Yeah. I don't know. Can you think of is there any application outside of Claude Code or OpenAI's Codex? I don't know that I can point to an example of all these, like, I guess, Clay's been around for a while, Lovable, that they definitely hit success, but we haven't seen any, iOS app stores that have just came out of nowhere, yet, or Android store. So it's interesting, like, the wave is building, but it's not here yet. Feels like, will it come?
Yeah. I mean, or is it like we talked about during right after the holidays, where I think Claude really had some rocket fuel poured on it, because everybody was talking about it. But then the reason everybody was like, saying, oh, I'm talking about this, is they all had downtime to like tinker and like do their special projects that they like, oh, I want to do this like workout tracking app or XYZ app. And so, yeah, maybe there's not going to be this wave, and it's just a bunch of like passion project, personal projects, and maybe a few of them take off. And there is the iOS ripper that like somebody's like, oh yeah, I have that problem, I'd pay for this app.
Yeah. I just watched, there's a video that I want to watch. They call out Weavy AI. I don't know a lot about it, but it's essentially their value prop is to help you build beautiful mobile applications. And it's kind of interesting because it's when I really like this statement, was ChatGPT and Gemini, in terms of at least the images, they're the average of everything on the internet. So all the images you're going to get are just the average of whatever the prompt is, which is kind of an interesting way to think about it, right? Because they've ingested all this data. And so, but I think what you can say pretty consistently is, or confidently, is a lot of the AI generated mobile applications will probably have very similar user interfaces, because, right, they're all kind of coded, trained on the same thing. And so it's interesting now, there's a whole new category market of products that essentially is helping you beautify your Gen AI built iOS.
Yeah.
So it's just like we're just creating new layers to solve fucking problems embedded in the stack, and we're just constantly chasing our tail. Which, hey, isn't that the beautiful thing about capitalism, right? And this is why we think there's always going to be room for labor, is because like these open up, they solve problems, but then they create new ones, and then those have to be addressed, and you just can't, you don't know what you don't know, which I think is cool. But I haven't a chance. I just saw it this morning before we hopped on, and but I thought that analogy of just like, oh, we create all these cool apps, but now in order to differentiate your app, it has to be good and look good. And now there's a whole new product category to help you look good and not look like every other generative AI mobile application. It's just like, fuck, how did we get here?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, to that note, there was, I haven't seen it for a while. My feed hasn't been giving it, but there was one individual who he would share his prompts, and either he was a photographer in his past life or just had extreme knowledge of it. But when he would prompt it, he would put like, it'd be very detailed. He'd be like taking with a Canon XRX, mid 90s, XYZ filter. And then it would come out like that. And so, yeah, like while there may be these apps that like extract that away or obfuscate it, like if I guess maybe that you don't want the average app and you're like, can prompt it correctly, you could probably get the same effect.
Agreed. And I think I know, forget if it was Harvard or MIT, but somebody did an assessment on this, and essentially it found that the models matched the proficiency outputs that they had to the proficiency inputs of the prompter. Meaning, if you're a coder, or let's just say with your analogy, if you're a photographer and you know all the different aspects and you're very knowledgeable in your subject, then you go write a prompt to produce something in photography. The quality is going to be so much higher than someone who didn't know about photography prompting it, right? For all the different reasons we said. I'm going to be like, hey, I want a picture of a flower next to it, like a background of a water. And they're going to be like, I want the aperture ratio to be this, and this is the camera, Nikon or Canon, and light setting, and whatever, and frame rate, and you're going to get a beautiful output. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes to, there was some Twitter, I can't remember who said it. It may have been the Spotify, because Spotify came out and was like, our top engineers haven't written a line of code since like December. And I think somebody had like chimed in and on the thread and was like, well, then what are they doing? And why do you need them? And his response was like, we still need the engineers because they have to construct and guide and direct. So I think it goes back to things we've said before too, is like, I'm not going to spin up a hedge fund because I don't know how to articulate them, the insights, but somebody who has run a hedge fund can do it. And same with like the engineering and like being a software developer, is they're going to be able to prompt it way more efficiently than I could. So back to your point, like, yeah, the photographer, the engineer, the hedge fund manager, they're all going to be able to do it and leverage it way better than average Joe saying, create me the flower on the table.
Exactly. So I kind of wanted to shift to, we talk so much about software, everything is software these days, but I think there's an interesting distinction just from listening to the Snowflake CEO who used to work at Google, to the CEO of Databricks. Databricks has been posting on LinkedIn about how their growth is actually accelerating. So SaaS, software as a service, versus platform as a service, and really kind of the analytics engines, which I thought was interesting, because so many of these enterprise companies and companies in general, data is the context of the real world. And if it's stored on your platform, getting able to interact with it has always been kind of a challenge. The SQL queries, what is your governance model? But now everyone understands natural language, and now you can run all these different queries just by the generative AI layer owned by Snowflake and Databricks. You prompt in, it translates, then it queries, and they have all the data. So again, interesting SaaS moat, workflow ownership, kind of what we talked about earlier, versus data platform moat is data ownership, right? So I think you're going to see these data platforms continue to hoover in data, make it easier to interact with, but really focus on not getting disintermediated by anybody else. And ironically, they may actually have like some of the strongest, because now they can build up the stack and vertically integrate into more SaaS applications and dashboarding versus like these other providers, because they don't have the data. So they're going after the workflow. So it's kind of an interesting battle of like who's going to win out and who's going to own the end customer, right? This is going to be the SaaS vendor that integrates with data like Glean that's sitting in Salesforce, or are you going to have Salesforce, essentially build their own Glean version and keep the data locked out or locked in to keep the customers.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe the one that we're sort of all blindly not thinking about is like Claude, because we're already giving Claude so much. I know, at least for us, like a quote from one of like our finance guy the other day was like, oh, he was asking for help in one of our channels. He's like, I don't want to open Metabase ever. I just want to talk to Claude. And Metabase is like our like BI type analytics.
Got it.
Maybe the sleeper, what people aren't seeing is Claude is going to be this like new middle layer of like, and even there won't be a need for any of these other SaaS because you just naturally prompt it because it's already integrated to your Salesforce, your, BI tools, your Grafanas, like everything. And you're just like, what was the outage on our RPCs today? And then it's just like pulls it and it's like, here you go.
Yeah. And this goes back a couple months late, second half of 2025, Brian at Reforge had this great article, right, on the whole kind of like the 3 to 4 step process. He was focused on OpenAI at the time, but yeah, it's so you race to get mass user adoption, which I think OpenAI is definitely one, even versus Anthropic is like, I think I've heard like 10% of OpenAI's daily or monthly active user base. Then you open it up, right? And MCPs really help with this. So to your point, Claude Code can now talk to like Play natively, I think Slack natively, maybe Asana or Canva. And so you open it, you pull in all this different functionality, everybody's interacting through Claude, and then you close it, right? And then Claude, who's Anthropic, is fantastic at building software, obviously. And then, what's to stop them from building a Play light or Play good enough alternative? And that's the risk that Brian highlighted. And at the same time, he said, what is the option, right? If you choose not to participate, then you get locked out of all the users that want to use your service with an OpenAI or Claude front end. So it's like pick your poison and try to race to build faster, which is kind of interesting. So that's so that I would say it's more B2C, right? But you're also, I don't know if you're not even using Claude Cowork for your personal, you're actually using that at work. So it is interesting to think like, how could enterprise analytics engines or SaaS companies get disintermediated even in the B2B space? It's kind of a trip. But those systems, I don't know, man, those systems like to maintain it and do all the things, the data repositories, I don't know. It seems tricky, complex.
Yeah. I can see it though. Even with, right now, so like OpenAI has this too, but you can like integrate Google Drive. And I know not like large enterprises aren't like using, well, maybe some of them are using Google Drive. For us or for others that are like still startup or SMB, a lot of you're using Google Drive and, it does the natural integration. So I can query, right?
Yep.
And be like, hey, what are the customer notes or pull up this file? Yeah. And to your point, like building a clay-like model, like what there was a PDF that Anthropic put out and it was like how Anthropic teams are using Claude Code. And then it went through every org. It was like product manager, engineering, security.
Oh, very cool.
But to that point, like what stops them from like, hey, here's our ideal GTM workflow. Here's their prompt or here's how to set it up.
It's crazy. This week will be focused. I'll be listening to a lot of this stuff on the Claude 4.6, Opus 4.6 versus the Codex and GPT 5.23. So it'll be interesting. So I find it, if you look at the stock market and then you look kind of around all the craziness around, jobs and, what's going to be successful. So I had this thought on, how unpacking two truths. One hand, picks and shovels get all the stock price lift, right? NVIDIA and Broadcom and memory, but SaaS is just getting destroyed. But there's also this consensus agreement that like the application layers where a lot of the value is going to be derived from, and which is SaaS. So I guess to your point, maybe, we're Claude and OpenAI will be the SaaS layer. That's one hypothesis, but there's this, Iconic did this survey, and so 37% of the companies that they surveyed plan to change their pricing model in the next 12 months to outcome based, which I thought was really interesting. So for two reasons. One, it kind of forces you to cut the fat, right? So you can't just be charging per seat and just saying, oh, I'm going to make my 78% margin or whatever it is, because people just want to pay for the outcomes. But at the end, on the other side, I mean, can you think of a better business than, I know I'm driving these outcomes for you, so I want 50% of the upside.
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around how you structure that.
I don't know, if you think about traditional software, right? And the hard part has been the implementation and getting the value out of it, right?
Yeah.
It's not the technology, it's the people, process, and the change around it. So it's interesting, you essentially would have to own and embed more of the people and process within your application. But then you still are going to have the challenge of the systems of the company, unless your quote unquote employees are AI agents that you can just tell to change the way they do business, right? And they're just taking a handoff from the output of whatever your quote unquote AI SaaS is to their AI workers. Otherwise, you're still going to have that friction of people and process not be able to change as fast as business wants.
Yeah. I guess, and maybe I'm not thinking about this, but like, how do you charge or how do you get somebody to contractually agree to the output? Like, you're like, we'll come back at the end of the year or the end of the quarter and see what your gross profit margin is. If it's greater than this delta, we will take
Well,
20.
I think it's more along the lines of like Zendesk or ServiceNow. Hey, we resolved X amount of tickets. So if you don't get a ton of tickets, or maybe X amount of tickets resolved with the 75% customer satisfaction. So it's probably metrics that are built in by the platform would be my thought, versus truly and customer outcomes internally of like, we hit our margin goals for Q4 or something like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah. But I guess even on that, like, I'm just trying to think like how you build that like contract. You just, instead of like you do 75% reduction in tickets but you're putting some type of price tag and you're getting the customer to agree to that. But I guess if they agree to it, they're fine. But
yeah, it's going to be an interesting time for, I think, procurement departments, because we're in this like flux of the former co-CEO of Salesforce, I forget his name. He started at a new firm. It's basically like Amazon Connect, but they've hit 100 million ARR. And he said, I would argue that the business model transformations are harder than technology. So it wasn't so much that, Siebel didn't want to do SaaS or couldn't figure out SaaS. It's more of the perpetual licensing and S&S subscription model to recurring seat-based, right, fees was the challenge. And I think this is going to be another big one. Is it won't be easy to figure out. You've got the outcome-based pricing, and like, who's going to do it like correctly. Just knowing everything is so competitive. The first people to crack it, kind of like the first quote unquote company to reach AGI, is just going to have such a head start. It's hard to say. It's just going to be like this churn, which again, I guess is why the SaaS markets are, and they just don't know who the winner and losers are. So winners and losers.
yeah, it's, I need to think about this. It's interesting. And the reason I think about that is because it's something that we're constantly dealing with with our pricing, because there's very competitive, and we earn revenue off of volume. But then I'm like, there's a way to tell the customer you're going to get more volume, but if you do, we get to earn with you, like type thing. Like, but how do you so in my mind, my wheels are spinning of like, how would you structure that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably a good problem for Claude. And if you
Yeah.
can get a specific industry, I think one of my thoughts that I didn't tie off on is procurement departments are going to be the winners here, because I don't know that they're going to replace this year Salesforce.
Yeah.
but they are going to come in with every quote unquote, new AI startup vendor in the CRM space and be like, well, I shouldn't be paying as much. I want to take it down 20%. So,
Yeah.
and it's going to be interesting to see what that does to earnings. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on this, but like on the procurement part, like I just closed a large one with a very large procurement team. And I don't think there would be a way for me to build outcome-based pricing with them. They'd be like, no, we need to know the price now. It's just like, they need to know what that cost is, not like, oh yeah, we'll agree to this in the future. Could be more. Cause if it's outcome-based, right, you're going to like, I guess the way I'm thinking is you would earn more if they earn more. Cause if the outcomes improve, you would, you're saying, we'll take this. Like, I'm sure maybe there's a baseline. Maybe that's how it's being structured.
Yeah, there always has to be a baseline, or if it's just like instead of per seat, it's per ticket, right? And so there's some metric that the
Yeah.
vendor can track, and there's an agreed upon resolution or what qualifies as the outcome. But yeah, I think it's a good research for this week. Come back with, see if we can find some examples out there in the market, or people have it. Throw a comment on there. Any successful outcome-based pricing? Because I mean, shit, who wouldn't want outcome-based like pricing for consulting, right? That was the whole promise of fixed bid. And then the consulting companies hate it. And I haven't seen many of them. So maybe AI knowledge workers will be different though, because you can just throw more compute at it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end. We're out of time. So thanks for everybody for tuning in. If you got any comments or questions, throw them in the below, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.